Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, everybody, for turning out. I mean, it's not every place in America you have people volunteering to come out for mind-numbing, impenetrably dense statistics. But I've been working with some of you and with the city and with the transit agencies for the last couple of months to try and make sense of what's become a contentious issue, but for me is increasingly looking like a slam dunk. The prospect that actually improving the quality of transportation choice in Albuquerque doesn't cost, it will pay. And if I'm right, then the question is going to become not whether, but how. And the second question will be how quickly. I'll tell you right now, one of the punchlines is if it's going to take you 30 to 40 years to get there, it's not worth it. There's this old phrase we use that a good idea, unlike fine wine, and we have some tonight, thank you, doesn't get better the longer it sits on the shelf. So the quicker you can get something good done, the better off you will be. But I'll let you make up your own mind as we look at the data here and go through the questions that we asked. The first question we asked was, what's the economic imperative here? Because if your economy is perfect and everybody's benefiting from it, it's kind of hard to make the case that you should go to the mat for making an investment to get an economic return. So the reality is the curve in the upper right-hand corner answers the question, how did the overall economy do? And we measured real GDP per capita both in the United States and in Albuquerque from 2001 to 2013. If you're bionic, you can see this, but just trust me. So the red line shows the economy increasing up till about 2006 or so, and then plunging, and then bounding back up again. It's fairly resilient. That's the United States economy by that measure. Resilience is about the ability to rebound, in effect, right? And then the blue line is Albuquerque, and you see it peaking sooner, dropping at roughly the same rate, but it's not rebounding. It's sort of held its own. So the good news is it stopped plunging, and you're at a point of inflection here. You could make choices that keep it stable. You can make choices that have it go down further, but preferably you'd like to see it go up. Now that's for the economy as a whole. How about people? Here we've looked at the change in housing price on the lower right-hand corner. And you see again, home prices increasing till about 2006 ago, and then sort of a stair step down. And yes, there's been some rebound, but you're only to the point where you were 10 years ago. So people who own homes here, on average, have lost 10 years of property value. And if you're in low-value communities, there were plenty of people who were wiped out, hence the stories the last couple of years about foreclosure and bankruptcy hotspots. So you got to do better than that. What makes us think we can do better than that? Next slide, please. This is from an annual report that I recommend everybody read. It used to cost money. It's called Emerging Trends in Real Estate, ULI and PriceWaterHouseCoopers, a real page turner. It doesn't do much for getting you to sleep at night, but it's good stuff. So the nation's largest investors and developers are asked two questions every year. Where would you prefer to invest? What would you like to invest in? As to what would you like to invest in, the answer increasingly is high-density, urban, mixed-use, transit-oriented development. I mean, that's the mantra. Some of them who are smart and have actually looked at America add mixed income to mixed use, and the really smart ones say preferably with a 24-hour environment. And then the question is, in their point of view, where are those opportunities? So then they rank the top 75 markets, and Albuquerque came out 47th out of 75. Could be worse, could be better. But then when you take the 20 western state cities, starting with San Francisco and going down through Seattle and Portland and Salt Lake and so forth, Albuquerque came out 20th out of 20. So I don't have to do a study on that one. You do need to do better. So to do better, you have to produce the opportunities that investors are looking for. You can't rebuild Albuquerque the way you want or just with local money. How do you do that? Next slide. So we took a look at 10 years of property data, as Brian said. Bernalillo County gave us 100% cooperation, and we got 100% of parcel records for 10 years, from the first quarter of 2006 to the first quarter of 2015, and we carefully memorized all 300,000 parcels. If you believe that, the beer's even better than I thought it was. But what we found was where property value increased, where it decreased, what kind of property increased the most, and then we took a look and we compared the county as a whole, the city as a whole, the corridor that the ART has proposed on for a whole, and then each of the 25 stations and stops that are proposed. So the way this works is you collect the assessed value of property in the county, and then you index it by the value per acre covered. And so the top map is what it looked like in 2006. Bottom is what it looked like in 2015. You can see that green line, I hope, circled around the corridor, the east-west corridor central on Central, including, to be fair, some of the north-south stuff coming off of downtown and a little bit to the north to Lomas, was the most consistent corridor for increased property value during this period of time. If we focus on Central Avenue then, and we look at the rate at which that property increased, what do we know or what are we projecting about what the rate of increase might be? And there's a couple of different methods. A really good, solid estimate was produced for NAIOP by a couple of people here, and they conservatively looked at the 5.25 miles right in the center of all this, and only looked at vacant available properties, assumed that what would be developed would be only on that vacant properties and built out to fully entitled levels. And they came up with a figure of 935 million that should be. We're missing 3 zeros there. And what we did was we looked at the whole length. So station to station, UNSERT to tramway, we drew a 5/8 mile buffer around each of the stations. So edge of that buffer to edge to the buffer, that's 14.95, call it 15 square miles. It's 12,000 acres altogether. And then we looked at comparably structured deals around BRT and BRT type opportunities in a few other cities. And we're still conservative here for a variety of reasons, but we believe you should be shooting for at least $2 to $3 billion just for this. And we're calling this the real estate return on investment, okay? Next slide. So what does this look like in other cities? We have a couple folks here from Cleveland, Chris Renee and Grace Gallucci and Dick this right there. And these are heroes. You should all get to know them because these are people who learn by doing, and they delivered what I'm going to tell you. So they put the coalition together that delivered a successful bus rapid transit, a little bit shorter than yours, total length of 6 miles? Okay, 6 miles, 5 miles, whatever. But the health line links downtown with University Circle, and which, if you don't know it, that's Case Western Reserve, the Cleveland Clinic, University Health Center, and Miracle of Miracles. They've all started the infill in Midtown and Huff, two of the tougher areas in the United States right now. And to date, they've generated $6 billion in a real estate return on investment. In Nashville, which I consider a control on these numbers because not everything's worked as planned yet, they plan to implement the BRT and something very much like your plan, integrated development ordinance, here in Albuquerque at the same time. The legislature there, unfortunately, has delayed the introduction of the BRT, but they went full speed ahead with the development ordinance, which what? It signaled to the development community that those conditions I talked about were being met here. In just a period of a few years, they've gotten $1 billion of investment. And the thing I want you to remember is they started out with what the planning director told me there he weighed in as 10 pounds of zoning and development regulations. They tore all that up through a process like the one you're going through now right here. They created 21 districts across the city. All of downtown is just one, and each of the 21 get a 4-page brochure, and that is the ordinance. That's the whole thing. Nobody can claim it's too complicated to understand. If you don't believe me, go to Nashville and download it. It's the kind of thing you should be striving for. So we think that you can mimic or even exceed those numbers, but there's 3 economic imperatives you need to achieve for realizing those benefits. Number 1 is you actually have to build better mass transit. And the planned ART is a good down payment on that. It will create a fixed guideway, bus-based system with twice the frequency of what you've got right now, lowering the wait time from every 15 minutes to every 7 minutes. And in turn, that'll adjust the rest of the schedule, it'll increase connectivity, and you'll lay the basis for the second route from Central, or the universities really down to the airport, and possibly more routes, as we were hearing about today, over on the west side. So that's the transit side. Number two, you want to achieve the transit-oriented development we were talking about. You can't do that without streamlining your regulations. I don't have enough time to say everything I've heard from you about what needs to improve on those regulations, but you've got a model there in Nashville of a comparable city that you can look up to, and we believe you can do that. And if you do it, you'll guide and accelerate private investment in the right kinds of stuff in targeted places along that corridor and citywide. And the third is you got to grow your base of productive employment. You got a modest growth rate in population. You got a pretty good growth rate in households because of the two population bumps for millennials and people like me, whatever we're called, aging boomers. What'd you call me, Brian? Venerable? I know what that means. And you got to grow the base of jobs. You got to grow your neighborhoods efficient. You got to minimize economic leakage. Next. Which leads us to talking about really two kinds of return on investment. We talked about real estate return. Now let's talk about the community return on investment. Communities should be able to expect, because of this investment, that the cost of living will drop, that permanent jobs will grow, that people will respend the money that they save. So it's reasonable to ask, are people really going to save money because of this thing? I mean, how do we know that? How do we look at not only the changes in property value, but how do you actually look at things like retail expenditure increase and retail expenditure per acre? Next. So we're the author of something called the Housing and Transportation Affordability Index. I don't know how many people here are familiar with the Housing Affordability Index, but usually, well, let's have a show of hands. You're sitting too long already. Okay. So usually what happens, in the top row there, the map on the left, that's supposed to be yellow, and I'm sorry for repeating this, but they say that power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. I don't know what to call that color, but that says that if you ask the question, how many people who earn median income can keep it below 30% of that income, it's that big yellow area there. And you know where that index came from? You know, I thought as a researcher there was a committee that carefully monitored conditions and analyzed and correlated, and I didn't find a committee. I did find an old English poem that migrated 100 years ago over here, the last line of which was a week's wage for a month's rent. Think about it. That's where the rule of thumb came from to keep your housing costs at a quarter of your income, and now you too know 100% of the hard science behind affordability indexing. And what's wrong with it is 100 years ago, transportation only cost 3% of income, and today it costs almost as much as housing. So the average in Albuquerque for median income people is 28% of income goes to housing, but the problem is another 23% goes for transportation. So the real index there is 51%. That's right, you heard it. Over half of income goes for housing and transportation. Quick question?
Transportation, how is that affected? Is that the national average?
No, we took all 180,000 census block groups in the United States and we correlated observed car ownership and vehicle miles traveled per household per year and transit patronage, and we priced it. And we priced it differently for people at different incomes and social and household situations, and controlled for household size, number of commuters per household and income, and then recalibrated the whole thing. And what resulted was that map on the right. There's that pseudo yellow color too, but you notice it's shrunk up. That means there's fewer truly affordable zones. We've created a new index, it's been adopted by HUD, of keeping your housing and transportation costs below 45% of your income. And where is it shrunk up around? It's shrunk up around downtown, it's shrunk up along the Central Avenue corridor. Interesting. That's for median income. Unfortunately, not everybody earns average income. In Albuquerque, you got a 21% poverty rate, a skewed income distribution. For people who earn 80% of income or less, the housing index is that map on the left, and look how much has shrunk up with affordable areas on the right. The only way to deal with that realistically, is to keep both the cost of housing and the cost of transportation down. And so how much can you do with that? Well, first of all, on the property value side, what happens usually when you develop transit stations is you have a lot of meetings like this. And some people say, great, and other people say, I don't know. And a third group says, can't happen here. You don't understand how it is. You're from Chicago. So what happens really is that as people get comfortable with or recalibrate the plans, new transit gets announced and vacant land starts to increase in value, and older land that could be used more intensively gets used in value. The transit opens, and smart places don't stop. They add extra service, they increase frequency, there's other impacts, and you look forward. If you don't do that, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. If you only did the art and you didn't do the development ordinance, it would be like Nashville. They'd be getting $1 billion worth of value instead of $3 billion worth of value. So there's 2 billion good reasons for getting this one right. All right, next. Does this work in other places? This is Woodstock, Georgia. Our colleagues at Placemakers, Susan Henderson and company, took a look at 3 things that happen in this near Atlanta city. And one was building a new 2-block downtown on a main street. The second was the outlet mall that was built. And the third was a super Walmart. They asked the question, how much land was consumed? Well, the Walmart took up 30 acres, the outlet mall took up 49, and the main street took up 2 blocks and a fraction of the space that we're talking about. Property tax per acre, yes. Walmart did generate $5,700 per acre, the outlet mall $8,900 per acre, and the main street $224,000 per acre. Anybody need a study on that one? I mean, that's a pretty clear signal, right? Residents per acre, 0 at the Walmart, I think, 0 at the outlet mall, and 103 along the main street. Jobs per acre were 10 at the Walmart, 20 at the outlet mall, and 40 at the main street. Even during the recession, there was a 17% overall increase in property value and taxes paid from that thing. So what's the upside? We talked about the $2 to $3 billion potential from really working the whole corridor. And what you have to do to get there is you have to simultaneously work your new development ordinance, send the right signal, maybe do some enhancements in the way of supplemental transit or car sharing along the corridor, make it more walkable. And there's other values not counted in that 2 to 3 billion. If you achieve the second level of benefits, you could boost it even more. Here's a number I want you to think about. If you look at what people are spending right now on transportation per year in Albuquerque, it comes to $2.4 billion collectively per year. Over your 30-year period for planning this or for any bonds that have to get issued, that's $72 billion a year, even without it, or for 30 years, without even counting any cost increases. So I want to submit, that's a big number. That's a real big number. It's almost twice what it could be if you really could push a button and pull all this off. Now you can't do it instantaneously, so you have a timing problem. And other cities have dealt with this by passing a tax, bonding against it, bringing the money forward to accelerate. You're handling it a different way here by accumulating underutilized assets in Albuquerque and using it to leverage a federal grant. And after you get that first line done, I would strongly recommend looking at the way other cities have more rapidly expanded the options that they have. If you do that, you'll have more people like the ones who are only spending a little over $8,000 a year instead of the average of around $12,000 a year, or the people way away from the corridor who are spending an astonishing $16,000 a year on the cost of transportation. If you aggregate all that up, I think you got a potential here for something like an 8 to 19% reduction in the cost of living for people who start riding ABQ ride who aren't, and almost that much for those who are from the improved level of service there. And as I like to say, that's an 8 to 19% raise tax-free, unless you guys choose to tax it. So that's a lot, and then some of that will result in maybe $100 to $200 million extra increase in things like retail expenditures. because people aren't spending as much as they'd like to because they're not earning as much because they have to pay too much for transportation. So this is the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, I could go on with other benefits, but I think that you should think about installing the mass transit the way you think about why it makes sense to insulate your house or put in better energy efficient widgets on a building like this. Great space, by the way. I think there should be sort of like a transit-oriented disco here, I think. But that's real money that we're talking about here. So that's the upside. So you need the modern transportation system, and you need to see it as a down payment on even more of the same. You need to streamline the regulations and make sure that they really happen on time and happen in the way that you streamline and accelerate the good and stop the bad. In one city, Montgomery, Alabama, they implemented something like Nashville, and they brag about taking minutes what used to take months in the way of project approval. That would be nice to imagine if you could really do it. And then you really got to grow the job base. I think the ideas for Innovate ABQ are a really good start. You've got good accelerators and incubators right now, but you got to have places for those people to move into, or you're going to accelerate their move to Austin, Texas, and Denver, Colorado, and the goal is to grow the job base here. And the people who want to work in those expanding firms are the kind of people, like some of you, are looking for walkable, transit-oriented, et cetera, kinds of opportunities. Next, that's it? Wow. She is the world's best handler and editor, I got to tell you. So anyway, keep in mind that if you do this right, you got a really big upside. I don't have any stake in this game. I'm not an investor, but I feel invested because I was asked to take an independent look and say, what did the evidence tell us? And what the evidence told us is Central Avenue is already acting like a TOD district, but much slower than it would than if you had modern transportation and the better connections and the enhancements that we've been talking about. So if you want to make it, figure out a way to get this thing done. You've got no time to waste. Thank you very much. Any quick questions?
Thanks, Scott. And
You didn't have to shout.
how about some questions from the audience? Get a little bit of a discussion.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So how does Enrique Peñalosa, the governor of Bogota and Colombia, pass have to do with this? When you're talking about public transport as a human rights issue as opposed to some sort of economic value in the changing culture relative to people riding or engaging in mass transit, which is the problem here. Every bus that someone might or could take is an exercise in engaging people that they don't want to engage. How do we change the cultural identity of mass transit as opposed to driving our own cars for me?
All right, did everybody hear the question? How do we actually make transit something more like a right and a cultural imperative? And how do we get people to feel comfortable with riding along with people who aren't like them, all right? And I think it's an excellent question, and it's a challenge that you're facing here right now. First of all, you've got to let people know what it actually means to ride mass transit. They've got to feel comfortable that it'll work for them. You've got to do what ABQ Ride is starting to do, which is increasing the reliability and the connectivity of the service. And you got to make sure that the places where people are waiting, that people feel comfortable on it too. But the second thing is that because the economics are so much of the compelling reason, and they work not only for people at the bottom of the economic spectrum, but anybody who rides it, you've got to actually disclose that there's an economic benefit to getting this right. Because otherwise, the effective demand for something that people don't know is possible is zero. Nobody around here that I've seen is marketing the idea that you could have a 10% reduction in the cost of living. There's somebody here, where's Rob? There you are, who was telling us yesterday that he actually lives in Albuquerque without a car. And I'll tell you, he's not the only one. He's not the only one. 45% of households here have either 0 or 1 cars. Now there's an awful lot of people who have 2, 3, or 4 cars, and that's why there's still as much traffic as there is. But I would submit that there's actually a better appreciation for this than some people realize. Nonetheless, I think there's an overreaction to homelessness, to difference, if you will. And I think you got to work hard on the idea that this has to work for everybody or it's going to work for nobody. On homelessness, my favorite solutions, in addition to the usual organizing and service supports, are to actually increase the supply of real shelters and places for people to live, and as that happens, really work on poverty reduction so you get to the heart of the problem instead of just offering to service it forever. So if you treat transit like it's only for the ultra poor, it'll get perceived that way. It has to actually work for everybody, and that's what I would recommend. Yes, sir, Counselor.
Could I just quickly, piggyback on that? And I'm well aware of the issue. I mean, as just a dividing line, right? My wife will ride on the 766 but not the 66, and there is a difference. And when we have ART, there's going to be another difference. But nonetheless, these people are here, they're with us, they're part of our community. And there's a big effort going on right now with the county tax that's now being enacted that we're all paying 90% towards behavioral health and these services. And we've got to work together, city and county. But I think there's very good thinking going on with regard to the overall issue of behavioral health and homelessness. And we all need to pay attention and support that effort and support cooperation between the city and the county. We've really got, maybe not quite the amount of resources we need, but close to it between that use tax and the city or expense.
And if you achieve that, it's going to be a signature accomplishment. People are going to sense something's different is going on in Albuquerque, and you're going to get credit for that. Yes, sir.
And that actually brings up my question of concern, right? As a planner who's seen, even since we've gotten our bus rapid transit here in the city now, that I've already seen what other cities call transit gentrification, the same thing that our city councilor was just saying, that some people will ride the rapid rides but won't ride the other buses. And we have a large number of people that literally depend on the bus system because, like me, who doesn't have a car in this city, it's the only way to get around, right? And I think I'm just concerned that I've already seen practices on the bus system, like kicking people off who are sleeping, like who might be commuting on the bus an hour to get to work, but they're not allowed to sleep. And in other cities, that's something that happens when you commute on the bus, right? And then just the other practices of the way that homeless are policed on our bus systems make me really leery of what happens when we go even more to the direction of catering to people who would opt into rapid transit versus the people who absolutely depend on it. And my one last question is, I hope that it also comes with a suggestion, we have a long way to go to a bus system that is actually serving the needs of people in Albuquerque. And my one big comment about that personally would be, we don't have bus service after 7 o'clock on Sunday. So if you actually work or have a life after 7 o'clock on Sunday and you depend on the buses, you're kind of, it's up to you and your own devices to get around in Albuquerque. So again, my fear is that transit.
Well, I have some comments, and I see a couple hands here. One back here and one over here. Yes, sir.
Scott, I think one of the best things I heard tonight is our goal is job creation and economic mobility. Right? And the economic mobility piece of this is key because that's what's really going to help out folks who are at those lower wages. That reduction in expenses is, like you said, a raise. Like that's where the economic mobility piece comes in.
Right, that's good. Here and then here.
Say, how much does ridership actually matter? Or is it just a red herring? Really, we're investing in infrastructure, not the bus system that people are getting on. We want developers to chase the city spending $100 million on improving sidewalks, improving the streets visibility. So in other cities, has ridership correlated with investment, or does it not matter?
What was the ridership gain in Cleveland? 60%. 60%. So I think they both matter. I think, and the good news is that you know, the fact that some of these benefits are worth more to developers and investors and tax collectors, and some of it to everyday folks who need to ride, and some to the transit operator itself. Those aren't rivals. That's the makings of the beautiful coalition you need to sustain all of that. And I'm not just singing Kumbaya here. To Gary's previous point, Raj Chetty at Harvard's recent study that looked at correlating what made for actual economic mobility from the lower income segments of the population, top determinant for once, thank God, it wasn't just the zip code you live in determined. He went right between the eyes on transit access and a way to get to work. So I think you got to do something about it. You got a 21% poverty rate here, so the questions are legitimate, and as are the questions about the treatment of people on it. But I think that as you up your game and the transit operator looks towards late hours of use, more connectivity, more coverage of the city, you guys got to hold each other accountable to that higher standard. We had an organization in Chicago for 20 years called Imagine Chicago, where the motto was a place where nothing, no one, and no place is wasted. And you know, we built a coalition of inclusion by working with community leaders and churches and what weren't quite millennials yet, even teenagers, in gangs getting to get together with the cream of the civic community. It really made a difference. And I think, you know, an approach like that might be helpful here, and transit might just be the issue that helps bring people together, and Central Avenue redevelopment might be the deliverable on it that you should really shoot for.
So a slight variation on that. I think it's impossible to overstate the importance of job creation, but is there a proportionate difference between creating jobs on one corridor as opposed to outside the corridor? I don't know how you might define that, but it just seems to me if you can focus on job creation within the corridor, it might possibly have more direct impact than outside the corridor.
It's a great question. Just a couple statistics. As of today, roughly 30% of the jobs in Albuquerque are within 5/8 of a mile of Central Avenue right now. If you're in that core 5-mile section that I talked about, you can get to over 220,000 jobs even on today's schedule in 30 minutes or less, assuming they keep to the schedule. I can't speak to that, but it's a good schedule and it'll deliver that. As you double the frequency of the schedule, you'll be able to get to more, but you also have an opportunity, obviously, to increase the amount of economic activity there. More people are working at home. There's a lot of vacant property along Central Avenue that businesses could move into. I hope you learn how to build it in a mixed-use format with retail and office and even maker spaces on the first floor and residential upstairs. And I think there's other opportunities. There's some bigger spaces, I think, off the ABQ Innovate partnership and some others to bring people closer in. That said, you've also got these mammoth job generators at the Air Force Base, Sandia Labs, the VA Center, all the medical centers, and others. And I think that, you know, leave no job, leave no money behind. I mean, this has to be somewhat of a proactive mission to actually fix the economy, not waiting to see how the numbers come in 10 years, but actually setting these benefits as a goal. And I think you've got some really good assets. You've got the pieces you need to put it together. They haven't been connected yet, and you may need to create another organization or two to really stay the course and grow it. Other questions? Sorry? A little louder. Okay. Anybody else? I know I normally charge a whole lot of money for this, so you really should be asking me questions. Come on. So, anybody else?
I challenge you to create the soundbite for all the people that aren't in the room here.
Wow.
You know, that roll their shoulders and say, you know what, no one's going to take that thing. You know, up in my neighborhood, you know.
Nobody's going to take
I know,
it.
no one's going to take that thing. So
Yeah, nobody's going to make me save money. Nobody's going to make me get out of poverty. Maybe. Yeah. 20-second pitch. Wow. You know, don't leave the money on the table. Get the future now, right? And while you're at it, the future's so bright, you got to wear shades. How's that? All right, anybody else? Going once, twice? Thank you.